In this video, I want us to talk about other sexual offenses. Like a good example is defilement. Now, defilement is defined under Section 8 of the Sexual Offences Act, and defilement is sexual penetration with a child below the age of 18 years, and it applies to both adult and child offenders. Now, let's look at the actor's view of defilement. Now, the core requirement when it comes to defilement is penetration of sexual organs with the child. In the case of Kibale versus Uganda of 1999, the facts of this particular case were that the accused was charged with defilement of a minor, and the issue was what constitutes defilement. And the rule is that the prosecution must prove penetration and that the victim is below the age of 18 years. So the application of this case was that penetration is an equivalent of the sexual organ of the accused, entering the victim's sexual organ. So the conclusion was that both penetration plus age under 18 must be proved. In the case of Fred Wanjala versus Republic, the facts of this particular case was that defilement conviction was challenged due to lack of medical evidence. And the issue was whether medical evidence is mandatory. And the rule is that medical evidence is not compulsory if other evidence is strong. So the application of this particular case was that testimony and circumstantial evidence may suffice. So the conclusion of the case was that defilement can be proved without medical proof. In the case of Futi Mukiza versus Uganda in 1999, the facts of this particular case was concerning an appeal on extent of penetration. And the issue was whether degree of penetration is actually required. And the rule is that even slightest penetration is sufficient. And the application was that full penetration is not necessary. So the conclusion was that minimal penetration amounts to defilement. In the case of Uganda versus Joseph Mulindo of 1975, the facts of this particular case were that the accused was charged with defilement. And the issue was whether knowledge of age is required. And the rule is that the prosecution must prove age and knowledge of the victim's age. The application of the case was that the accused must be shown to know that the victim is underage. The conclusion of the case was that age and knowledge are essential elements when it comes to defilement. Now let's look at the mens rea of defilement. Now, the mens rea of defilement include, intention to cause penetration with a minor and knowledge that the victim is under the age of 18. Now, I want us to consider the statutory defense as captured in Section 8.5 and as far as defilement is concerned. Now, one of the defense is that the accused believed that the victim was over 18 due to deception, but the belief must be reasonable. Now, there is a limitation of this defense in that this defense is not available where the accused is related by blood or affinity to the victim. If you look at the case of Rex versus Daniel Abraham Johans of 1943, the facts of this particular case was that the accused claimed he believed that the victim was over the age of consent. And the issue was whether mistaken belief is a defense. And the rule is that the accused must take reasonable steps to verify age. And so the application of this case was that appearance made belief unreasonable. And so the conclusion of this particular case was that ignorance of age is risky and not easily excused. Now, let's look at consent when it comes to defilement. You see, consent is irrelevant in defilement. so that even if a child agrees, the offense of defilement is still committed. Let's look at now the issue of rape versus defilement. If you look at the case of Rex versus Farah Sisiko Sheshaho, the facts of this particular case was that the victim was a minor and the charge included rape. And the issue was whether both rape and defilement can be charged. And the rule is that both charges may be preferred depending on the facts. And the application of this particular case was that the courts may convict based on evidence of penetration and consent. And the conclusion of this particular case was that dual charging is actually permissible. We also have the case of Iria Ngobi versus Regiman of 1953. And the facts of this particular case were that the accused was charged with rape involving a minor. And the issue was whether rape charge is proper for minor. And the rule is that they prefer defilement, but a rape charge is not invalid. So the application of this particular case is that if evidence supports rape, conviction is valid. But the conclusion of the case was that rape charge is valid even where the victim is a child. If you look at the case of Rex versus Yonasani Kabaluli of 1937, the facts of this particular case were that the accused was charged with rape, and courts, considered defilement. And the issue was whether a court can substitute defilement for rape. And the rule is that courts cannot convict for an uncharged offense. And the application was that the accused had no opportunity to defend defilement charge. So the conclusion was that the substitution was not allowed. In the case of Sakila versus Republic, the facts of this particular case was that attempt to substitute rape conviction with defilement was present. And so the issue was whether substitution violates fair trial. And the rule is that the accused must be charged with the correct offense. And the application was that there was no opportunity to defend, defilement charge. The conclusion was that the substitution was actually improper. If you look at the case of Naholi versus Republic of 1967, the facts of the case were that the courts attempted, substitution of offense. And the issue was whether substitution prejudices the accused. And the rule is that the accused must not charge in order to defend himself. And the application is that defilement differs from rape legally. And the conclusion was that substitution may prejudice the defense. So what is the penalty for defilement? Now, if the child is below 11 years, the penalty is life imprisonment. If the child is between the age of 12 and 15 years, the penalty is 20 years imprisonment or even more. If the child is between the age of 16 to 18 years, the penalty is 15 years imprisonment or sometimes even more. Now, child offenders are dealt under the Boston Institution Act and also the Children Act. If you look at the case of Rex versus Daniel Abraham Jones, courts usually considers, the victim conduct, the moral behavior, and the circumstances of consent. And this is where you have mitigation only. In the case of Musyoki versus Republic of 1981, the facts of this particular case were that a 14-year-old complainant, sent a romantic letter. And the issue was whether mitigation is possible. And the rule is that the victim conduct may reduce sentence. And the application of this case was that encouragement by the complainant was a mitigating factor. And the conclusion was that the sentence was actually reduced. Now, let us look at attempted defilement. If you look at Section 9(1) of the Sexual Offences Act, it provides that attempted defilement is an attempt to cause penetration with a minor, so that the penalty is 10 years imprisonment or even more. Let's look at the other sexual offenses against children. And the first one is indecent acts with the child, covered in section 11. Now, the elements of indecent acts with the child includes, number one, sexual conduct without penetration, and secondly, it includes, pornographic exposure. So that the defense for indecent act is a reasonable belief that the child was over the age of 18. That is, if the accused was actually deceived by the child. But it is not available where one is related to the child. So the penalty for indecent act is 10 years imprisonment or even more. Another offense related to the child is the promotion of sexual offenses as covered in section 12. And that is simply manufacturing or distributing sexual materials involving children. So the penalty is usually 5 years for natural persons or even more, or a fine for corporate bodies. Another offense involving children is child trafficking as covered in section 13. And this is usually the recruitment, the transport, or the transfer of children for sexual exploitation. It requires intent, and it also requires sometimes knowledge. So the penalty is usually 10 years imprisonment or even more. Another offense involving children is the child sex tourism covered under section 14, which is simply organizing travel for sexual exploitation of children. So it includes, promotion and facilitation of children. And the penalty here is usually 10 years imprisonment or even more. The other offense involving children is child prostitution covered in section 15. And the acts of child prostitution, include using premises for child sexual exploitation. It includes procuring children. It includes using threats or inducement. It includes, exploiting influence or authority. And it also includes, paying for child sexual services. And the penalty for this is usually 10 years imprisonment or even more. The next offense is child pornography, which is covered under section 16. Now, the offense here includes, exposing, a child to pornographic material and possession or distribution of child sexual images. Now, the penalty here is 6 years imprisonment or a fine or both. Another offense involving children is prostitution. Now, the legal position is that prostitution itself is not criminalized, but activities surrounding prostitution are criminal. If you look at the Penal Code offenses, Section 153 talks about male persons who live on earnings of prostitution and control or exploit prostitutes. Section 154 talks about female persons who also live on earnings of prostitution. Section 156 talks about brothels, and this is where you have, the keeping or managing of brothels and also the renting of premises for prostitution. So here is a summary of what we've covered so far. We've talked about defilement, and we have said this defilement is strict liability sexual offense involving minors. We have also said that consent is irrelevant when it comes to defilement, and we have also said that medical evidence is helpful, but it is not essential. We have also said that age is actually a critical element. So that law strongly protects children under the Sexual Offences Act. And we've also mentioned that courts emphasize proof of penetration, they emphasize age, and they also emphasize intent. And so that is all I have as far as defilement is concerned and the other sexual offenses we've covered. If it is your first time here, make sure you follow this channel and you subscribe for more legal lessons and also legal analysis.